3 months ago, I believed I had built the perfect life. I had a thriving career as a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical company, a beautiful home in Connecticut, a vacation property in Maine, and a family I had always thought was loving and supportive. My wife and I had been married for 23 years, and while our relationship had its ups and downs, I never doubted that we were a team. She came from an affluent background, never having to worry about finances. She worked part-time at an art gallery, more as a hobby than a necessity. Our daughter, Emma, attended an elite private university, and I took immense pride in being able to provide her with every opportunity she desired. Then my world unraveled. It happened suddenly. My company announced a massive restructuring, and after 17 years of loyal service, I was summoned into a meeting with upper management. They handed me a severance package and told me my position had been eliminated. No warning, no transition period. Just like that, everything I had worked for was gone. The drive home felt like a blur as I rehearsed how I would break the news to my wife. I knew she would be shocked, perhaps worried, but I never expected what came next. When I arrived home, my wife was hosting her book club. I waited until her friends had left before sitting her down to explain what had happened. Her response was immediate and cutting. "Laid off? What do you mean laid off?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "How could you let this happen?" I tried to explain the corporate restructuring, emphasizing that it wasn't personal, that these things happen. I told her about the severance, reassured her that I would start job hunting immediately, and reminded her that we had enough savings to be fine for at least 6 months if we were careful. 6 months? She scoffed. You expect us to live off savings for 6 months? What about Emma's tuition? What about our summer plans? Her reaction stunned me. I had expected concern, maybe even frustration, but not immediate anger, as if I had deliberately lost my job to inconvenience her. The days that followed were tense. I set up a home office and began sending out applications, updating my LinkedIn profile, and reaching out to contacts. Meanwhile, my wife barely spoke to me unless it was to ask if I had heard back from any employers. When Emma came home for the weekend, my wife didn't even tell her about my job loss. Instead, she took her shopping, as if nothing had changed. I overheard them laughing in the kitchen that night while I sat in my office, drowning in applications and self-doubt. When I finally told Emma myself, her response was eerily similar to her mother's. "But Dad, what about my study abroad program? You promised." Not a single word of concern. "No, I'm sorry this happened." "No, how are you holding up?" Just immediate worry about how it would affect her plans. That weekend marked a turning point. On Sunday night, I overheard my wife on the phone with her sister. "I don't know what we're going to do," she sighed. "He's just sitting at home on the computer all day." I always knew he wasn't management material, but I thought he could at least hold on to his job until Emma finished college. Her words cut through me like a knife. But what she said next was even worse. I know. Mom and Dad warned me about marrying someone without a trust fund. At least Emma has my family's genes." I stood frozen in place, the weight of 23 years of marriage suddenly feeling like an illusion. This was how she really felt about me? All the years of building a life together, the sacrifices, the long hours, none of it mattered. I confronted her as soon as she hung up. "Is that really what you think of me?" I asked. "That I was never management material? That you regret marrying me because I don't have a trust fund?" She didn't even flinch. She simply sighed, as if I were being dramatic. "Mark, don't be ridiculous. I'm just frustrated. You have to understand, this affects all of us." "I'm well aware of that," I said bitterly. "I thought we were a team." She just walked away. That night, she moved into the guest room permanently. The following weeks were surreal. My wife and daughter essentially began ignoring me. They made plans without including me, whispered when I entered a room, and treated me like an inconvenience in my own home. Emma stopped returning my texts, replying only with brief, detached messages. Meanwhile, I continued my job search, but the market for executives my age was more challenging than I had anticipated. Opportunities were scarce, and rejections became an unwelcome but familiar routine. As I struggled to rebuild, I noticed my wife's spending habits escalating. New clothes, lavish dinners, a weekend spa trip with Emma. It was as if nothing had changed for them. When I confronted her about it, she brushed me off. "We're fine. My parents can help if needed." Another slap in the face. Her parents had never approved of me, always treating me as if I weren't good enough for their daughter despite my success. The idea of relying on them financially was humiliating. Then came the final straw. One evening, I checked our joint credit card statement and discovered that my wife had booked a luxury European vacation for herself and Emma, without even mentioning it to me. When I confronted her, she barely looked up. "We've been planning this for ages," she said casually. "Emma needs something to look forward to with all this uncertainty at home." "Uncertainty that I'm actively trying to resolve," I shot back. "Don't you think a European vacation is inappropriate right now? What do you expect us to do? Put our lives on hold because you can't find a job," she replied coldly. "Emma shouldn't have to suffer." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The reality of my situation had never been clearer. My wife and daughter had never seen me as an equal partner, only as a provider. My worth in their eyes was tied entirely to my income, and now that I no longer served that function, I was disposable. So I made a decision. Without a word to them, I sold our vacation home in Maine and used the funds to secure a fresh start elsewhere. I moved to a different state, away from the cold, dismissive glares and whispered conversations. For weeks, they didn't seem to notice or care, until they realized what I had done. Now the messages won't stop. The calls, the emails, the pleading. My wife and daughter, who had ignored me for weeks, who had treated me like I was nothing, are suddenly desperate to come back. But I have no desire to return to a life where love and respect are conditional. I never imagined I would be starting over at 52, but for the first time in years, I feel free. The realization that I had been valued only for what I could provide financially was a bitter pill to swallow. The people I had devoted my life to, my wife and daughter, had shown me just how conditional their love truly was. Then, the first glimmer of hope appeared. The next morning, my old college roommate, Tim, called. We had stayed close over the years, and he was one of the few people I had confided in about losing my job and how my family had responded. "Mark, my company is expanding operations in North Carolina," he said. "There's a sales director position opening up next month. It's not pharmaceuticals, but with your experience, you'd be perfect. Want me to put in a word?" For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of possibility. I interviewed virtually, and to my relief, I was offered the position. The salary was slightly lower than my previous job, but North Carolina had a much lower cost of living. It was a fresh start. I didn't tell my wife. At that point, we were barely speaking anyway. Instead, I began making quiet preparations. The vacation house in Maine had always been in my name alone. It was a property I had inherited from my grandparents, one I had poured time and money into over the years, transforming it into something truly special. My wife, however, had always dismissed it. She complained that it was too rustic, too remote, not nearly as impressive as the luxurious vacation homes her friends owned. And yet, she had never hesitated to use it whenever it suited her social calendar. I reached out to a realtor and listed the property. To my surprise, it sold quickly to a cash buyer. With part of the proceeds, I put a down payment on a modest but comfortable house in North Carolina, close to my new job. Next, I met with a lawyer to discuss my legal options regarding divorce and finances. I learned that, given the length of our marriage and the disparity in our incomes, I would likely be required to pay significant alimony. However, if I established residency in North Carolina first, the laws would be somewhat more favorable. My lawyer advised me to wait before filing. Taking his advice, I withdrew my personal share from our joint accounts and opened new accounts at a different bank. I left my wife's inheritance untouched, along with the college fund we had set up for Emma. I wasn't trying to be vindictive. I was simply protecting myself. Meanwhile, my wife and daughter continued their pattern of exclusion and indifference. My wife planned yet another extravagant shopping weekend with Emma. The day they left, I packed the things that truly mattered to me: family photos, personal items, important documents. I hired a moving company to transport my belongings to North Carolina and arranged for my car to be shipped. Before I left, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. I explained that I had accepted a new job in North Carolina and would be filing for divorce. I told them I had sold the vacation house and used my share of our savings to start over. I left the letter on the kitchen counter, along with the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared. Then I boarded a plane and didn't look back. The explosion came 2 days later. My phone erupted with missed calls and frantic texts. The first was from my wife. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Get back here immediately." Then from Emma. "Dad, how could you do this to us? Mom is freaking out." Call me now. My wife's sister weighed in next. Mark, you've really crossed a line. The family is discussing legal options. This is unacceptable. Even my mother-in-law left a voicemail, her voice dripping with venom. I always knew you were beneath our daughter. This pathetic stunt proves it. Our lawyer will be in touch. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on settling into my new home and preparing for my new job. It was strangely liberating. Painful, yes, but freeing in a way I hadn't expected. I mourned the family I thought I had while embracing the independence of my new life. A week passed. The messages changed tone. My wife's anger turned to negotiation. Mark, please call me. We need to discuss this like adults. Emma's messages softened, her words laced with regret. Dad, I'm sorry if I made you feel bad. Please talk to me. Another week passed, and desperation seeped into their words. My wife texted. The bank called about the mortgage payment. I don't know what to do. Please call me. Emma wrote, Dad, Mom's really struggling. I'm worried about her. Can you at least let us know you're okay? Finally, I responded with a brief email. I told them I was fine, that I had started my new job, and that my lawyer would be handling all communication regarding the divorce. I provided my lawyer's contact information and asked them to respect my decision. That opened the floodgates. My wife called my lawyer daily, alternating between threats and tearful pleas. Meanwhile, she was beginning to realize just how little she had understood our finances. She had never paid much attention, assuming the money would always be there. Now, she was facing the harsh reality that her part-time gallery job couldn't sustain the lifestyle she had taken for granted. Her parents, once so eager to judge me, refused to bail her out. They insisted she fix things herself. Emma, too, started sending long, emotional emails. Dad, I know I took you for granted. I was spoiled and selfish. Please give me a chance to make it right. I miss you. I responded with kindness but firmness. I told her that I would always love her, but I needed time and space to heal from the way I had been treated when I was at my lowest. I reassured her that I would continue to support her education, as agreed, but that my marriage to her mother was over. My wife's next move was to send mutual friends to plead her case. Our neighbors, couples we had vacationed with, even some of my former colleagues. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. I explained my side to those I trusted and declined to engage with those I didn't. Then the inevitable happened. I received a desperate email from my wife. She had been forced to sell our house at a loss to cover debts she had accumulated. She had moved in with her sister temporarily, but had already worn out her welcome. Her parents refused to rescue her. I was wrong, Mark. I see that now. I panicked when you lost your job and behaved terribly. Please let me come to North Carolina. We can start fresh. I didn't respond. Then Emma called, her voice trembling. Dad, Mom's a mess. She can't keep living with Aunt Sandra. Her friend at the gallery had to let her go because she kept breaking down at work. I don't know what to do. I felt sympathy, but I remained firm. Emma, I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, but your mother and you made it very clear how you felt about me when I lost my job. I've moved on, she pleaded. But Dad, people make mistakes. We were shocked and scared. Can't you forgive us? I sighed. I have forgiven you, Emma. That's why I'm still talking to you and supporting your education. But forgiveness doesn't mean putting myself back in a situation where I'm only valued for my paycheck. I received notice that my wife and daughter had booked flights to North Carolina. My lawyer advised me not to meet them without him present. A part of me was curious. Would they take responsibility, or was this just another attempt to manipulate me? But whatever happened, one thing was certain. I wasn't going back. My new job was going well. I had already been recognized for bringing in several new clients. I had made friends through Tim and his wife, joined a local hiking club, and even started dating a kind, self-sufficient woman who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. Looking back, I realized that my wife and daughter had shown me their true selves when life became difficult. It had been painful, but ultimately it was a gift. At 52, I had a second chance to build a life with people who truly cared about me. And some bridges, once burned, should stay crossed.